Alright, welcome to this video looking at assemblies. Typically when we think about assembling something, right, if I take two pieces, alright, our mind's eye, we can see that these match up like this and we can fold them and I get that corner like that, real nice, easy, and my brain has learned to function that way. But the reality is it's taken years and years and years to do that. Now, as a much older person, I just see that, I realize what's going on. However, when we jump into Inventor and we start working with the program, the reality is Inventor needs to understand every single one of those steps and what all needs to be lined up, right? So we have all these different planes that we have to line up to get that piece to match perfectly, all right? So that's what we're going to work at today and talk about. So that's just a quick, brief introduction. All right, when creating an assembly, first thing you can do is place some pieces. I'm just going to do this real quick. All right, so I chose a place for my file. This happens to be the bottom piece. I can rotate it along the different axes to get in a position, whichever position I want it in. So if I want it to be more like this. But the big thing here with the first one is we want to make sure we're grounding it. Now you can right click ground at origin, or you can also come over here to your browser and click the part and right click and ground it after you're done. Once you ground one, you're going to have this option of placing more. We don't need any more, so I'm just going to right click OK. Now it's time to add some more pieces, right? So grab another piece. Let's grab an end like that. Right? And for these pieces, you can rotate them to kind of get them the way you want them to be, but the constraints, or in essence how you're gluing it together, that's going to do all that for you. So I could literally place it like this randomly in the middle of nowhere, and it's going to do exactly what I need it to do when I want to. Now I have way too many pieces right now, but I'll show you how this works. I'm going to delete a couple of these because I only need two of them. But this is where our constraints come in, right? So in general, when it comes to constraints, I'll have an additional video that just kind of walks through all these different constraints, just if you care to watch that one. But when it comes to assembling flat parts, which for the most part with Project 4.8, that's what you're doing, you're working with 90-degree angles for basically everything as you're working with this. And so we're mostly going to use the type constraint called a mate constraint, and there's two different ways to do it. You can mate and you can flush. A mate is kind of like gluing two things together. So as you're working with this, you're taking two things and you're making them come together in a way like this along this idea. And so that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with a mate. And when I choose a mate, I'm choosing sides. What two parts do I want to glue together? And here I'm zooming around, and so that needs to be glued to there. Right? Click apply, that's very important. And as you can see, it's not quite where I want it to be, though it is properly mated. I can look over here in my browser, and you can see it says there's a mate there. It says there's a constraint there. And so I have what I need. All right, but just like with the pieces, right, our brain knows to line things up perfectly like this. The computer doesn't. It says, okay, they've matched, but they're at least matching on that plane. And this is where we get into our XYZ planes and making sure we get rid of all the degrees of freedom have to go away. So we have to add, typically we have to add 3 constraints per side. So the next thing I want to think about is, well, what do I want it to do, right? If this is my formation right now, right, I need this edge right here to line up with this edge right here. Okay, so if I want things to line up with each other, typically I'm going to use the flush constraint. Right? Flush means line up. And once again, they've lined up really nice. However, it's still not correct. And if I click apply here, you're going to see, we can visually see it doesn't look right. Even if it did look right, if I were to take these pieces, I can still move it, right? Which means there's a degree of freedom that has not been locked down yet, has not been constrained yet. And so the last one we need to do is going to be our last plane, right? We need this edge right here. Let me get a different view. This edge to line up with this edge right here. And so lining up, that's a flush. So I do that and I apply it, and hopefully everything is working there. All right. Now, everything I did is correct. If you're looking really close here, what this shows right here is really it's showing a problem with one of my parts. Most likely what I did was I measured something wrong, and so this piece right here is just a little bit thicker than this piece, this depth from this corner to this corner, this line. That distance right there is just a little bit shorter than what I really wanted it to be. So I can go back to my parts and I can actually edit them if I wanted to. All right. To edit a part, I just go back to the part and I'm like, okay, double click there, and it's going to single out that part. You can see here's all my different things. Here's my original extrusion. I can edit that. And it looks like I went just a little bit too far with my extrusion. I'm not exactly sure what the correct measurement is, so I'm not going to do that right now. But you can get back into that, and then when you're done, you can either go here to return or just double click on your assembly again. All right, so these are things to look out for. All right, that's a possible error. All right, now what are you going to do next? Right, I have this other part here. Right, that one is really funny looking. Okay, but for the most part, I'm going to do the same steps. I'm going to mate things. Right, glue things together. So I want those, and you see instantly it moves in the way that I'm going to want it. Now the order can make a difference. So making sure you do things in kind of a logical sense makes sense and it works. Sometimes your logic does not agree with the computer's logic. So just ask questions if you have them. But once we get everything lined up, what I should be able to do is go and touch these pieces, any of them, and nothing's going to move. Nothing's going to move. And in that way, we would call it fully constrained. Right? Now I could continue doing this, adding more pieces. Just keep going back, and right, I can come in here. I don't have to really do anything, and it's this process. Constrain it. Right, I mate what I want to mate together, so that's going to mate with this and there, and line things up. Right, so I'm moving my camera around, trying to get those right pieces. Sometimes the camera doesn't do it. Now, typically when we glue things, we would have to glue it on this side and on this side. Right, in the computer software, we just have to, technically, you just have to glue it to one other piece. Right. So you're seeing I'm lining things up correct. Here's another example of, for whatever reason, the parts that I'm using, something's not right. So maybe this piece is not glued in correctly, because that's that same distance there as it is there. Huh, I'll have to look into that. All right. Okay, and in the end, right, if I was building the automata box, I would add the back in there, and that would be good. All right. Okay, so that's a really brief overview of how this works. So watch this, get a sense of it. Like I said, I have a second video. It has a picture of a reindeer. That's from a future project. I'll post that one as well. So you can take a look at that. That shows you similar things that I'm showing you right here. But between those two videos, you should have a good understanding of what's going on. Once you start playing around with it once or twice, it's just gonna start working. If you have questions about how to do things, like you need things offset or off a distance, just ask. Right? Just ask. Typically, you're going to use this tool. Like if you want it off center, you don't want it right on an edge. You just say how far you want it off. Right? I want it 0.5. You can see right there it moved 0.5 inches off that. All right, I think that's it. Like I said, if you have questions, just ask.